Hi, friends, and welcome to Costuming in Color. This is a YouTube show dedicated to showcasing amazing costumers of color and those that support them. I'm Gigi, a cultural history buff, dabbleist, and costumer.
I'm Noelle, a costumer who likes to play both sides of the historical and cosplay world. Today, we are interviewing Paul of Pecco the Stoic. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
But first, some house rules. The first rule of costuming in color is that you tell everyone about costuming in color.
Yep. This way, even if you don't have people of color in your local groups, you can get to know some in our global community.
The second rule is that kindness matters. Aside from that, there are no rules. So let's get into it. Pecco, or Paul, I'll start with Paul until we talk about your Instagram name. Where are you from and do you still live there?
Sure. So I grew up in the DC metro area. I was born in Rockville, Maryland, but I lived the first 12 years of my life in DC. My family moved to Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is, right next door to DC. And we've lived here ever since. So
what is your favorite thing about where you live?
Well, this is an incredibly diverse area culturally. There are, multiple immigrant communities in the DC metro area. There's a large Latinx community, primarily from Central America, and there are West African communities. There's a large Ethiopian community here as well. And that is, bolstered the metro area's reputation for as a food hub, essentially, and for international cuisines and international food markets, which this area does not lack. So also growing up, when I attended, middle school and high school, I met students from virtually all walks of life. It was just a nexus of all of these cultures together, and students spoke a variety of different languages too.
I know that in the DC area, not only is it super diverse as far as culturally, people from all over the world immigrated there, but also there are lots of ways that you can get into green space. So can you talk about that a little bit? Are you into going outdoors?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I've gone on hikes, across the country with my folks. I'm very fond of the mountains. I visited the Appalachians, the Sierra Nevadas, the Cascades. I distinctly remember going to Acadia National Park in Maine. Well, yeah, they're very prominent, I'd say, in my memory.
Okay. So what is your Instagram handle and why did you choose it?
Sure. So my Instagram handle is Pecco the Stoic, and there is a bit of a backstory behind it. At first, got into a live action role play during my freshman year of college back in the fall of 2009. There was a now defunct LARP social club. The name of the LARP that it was affiliated with was called Dagger Here, which was a boffer game. So it fights with padded foam weapons primarily, and it's a game that started back in 1977, and there have been several spin-offs of it over the decades.
I did Amp-Guard.
Yeah, Amp-Guard is one of them. It is a spin-off. You had to essentially come up with an in-game name. I used to, well, I still do to this day, but especially when I was around, 18 or so, I listened to a ton of folk metal too, and other subgenres of metal, black metal, and so on and so forth. And I was a pretty big Korpiklani fan, and they're a Finnish folk metal band that's gained international notoriety. I listened to one of their songs. It was titled Pelon Pekko, which essentially is the Finnish and Estonian god of crops and beer. Also, yeah, and the harvest. So when I read the title, I was like, wow, this is catchy. I can go with this. I delved further into just the history of the name and also the Finnish language and Finnish culture. When I was a bit younger, when I was, in middle school, high school, I read about, well, a short story which sort of takes elements from the Kalevala, which is the a Finnish national epic poem, and derived several its stories from the poem itself. And I was just curious ever since. I've been curious ever since about Finnish culture and just Iron Age and early medieval history too. And fast forward a few years, at one of Daggerhere's premier events called Ragnarok, which is held on the same site as Society for Creative Anachronism, SCA's Penzik. I've met Skadian who goes by the name of Etienne du Palmer. She's, I believe, based in the West Kingdom. She attended Ragnarok. So she essentially coined the moniker the Stoic for me because of my, demeanor, and that it was pretty apt overall. So in addition to that, I appear stoic, well, because I was diagnosed as autistic at a very young age, approximately 3 to 4 years old. The way I process information, just the way I express my emotions, sort of, is affected by that. So
I also have a diagnosis of autism. And so, yeah, Pecco's exactly right. It's a different neurology. So the way I receive and, transmit information is affected by me being autistic. And one thing that I really try to do on this show is what was called masking. And it's where you, to make others comfortable and to fit in with social norms, you take on the expected facial features and even like little sayings and nodding or, interactions with someone verbally based on their comfort. Because a lot of times when I was younger, I got the feedback that I had a flat affect and people couldn't tell if I was angry or mad, or I didn't look like I was having a good time. And I guess I got tired of it and I started kind of masking really early, just based on that feedback. Why do you always look angry? And it's something that I'm not good at not doing, but I have noticed that during the pandemic, I've been able to not mask as much at home because I'm not out as much. So it's actually kind of freeing when you're able to do that. So I think it's really cool that you were able to show yourself the way you are to people, and you even got a nickname that's very appropriate for you based on that. That is a cool backstory, I think.
That's one of the great things about LARPing, and to some extent like Dungeons and Dragons also, but also like SCA and stuff, is if you're doing something where you take on a persona, you can use that persona to your advantage if you handle it correctly, or in a way that lets you take advantage of it. Because most people in those scenarios are willing to just sort of like roll with whatever is happening, and drop whatever their expected norms are. So if you find yourself in that same scenario, you might want to give this a go. So what is the costuming scene like where you live?
As I mentioned, in addition to LARPs and SCA baronies, there's a pretty large cosplay, comic fantasy convention and Renaissance fair scene in this area. Reenactment is far more niche, historical interpretation and living history. It's earlier period reenactment, such as medieval reenactment and ancient reenactment, is far more niche. I'm a member of an early medieval living history group called Maryland Saga. Their primary focus is on Viking Age. There was also a time when I was really into Viking Age reenactments up until the TV show, the History Channel show Vikings, just
Ruined that.
sort of ruined that, and so that just became stale for me. And
Been there.
Yeah. So Maryland Saga, tends to focus on mainly outdoor recreation such as hiking, hand-to-hand combat training, or just crafts too that were available during that time period. So after the show popularized, I decided to go ahead and explore various other contemporary cultures to the Viking Age. So my focus sort of shifted eastward. I don't know. I've lately been very drawn to like really obscure early medieval cultures that are Eastern European cultures too, that are on the periphery of the large empires and kingdoms like the Byzantine Empire and the Carolingian Empire.
So Paul has talked about a few things. So we talked about LARPing, SCA has been mentioned, and then reenacting, living history, those historical interpretation. So for anyone who's new here, that's like the sliding scale of historical accuracy. So you start with LARPing, where it's make believe, it's playing. You have modern things that are sometimes dressed as things that might be representative of something from the period that you're doing, but it's not necessary to be historically accurate. SCA is quite a bit more so, but definitely not to the point of reenactment. And reenactment is generally trying to mimic exactly what's going on, and those are usually done for educational purposes or experimental archaeology kind of purposes, where you're like trying to figure out how things would have been done by experiencing them in the way that they would have been done. There's a scale of history and historical accuracy, and Paul seems to be going through all of them.
Which actually leads me to the question, what do you label yourself as? Your description on Instagram is medievalist LARPer, early medieval reenactor, esoteric dork, naturalist, and outdoors enthusiast. So what label do you take for yourself?
More on the historical side, for sure.
It's good that Noelle gave us a little bit of context for these different types of groups. I'm going to ask for some context right now, actually. So I'm going to go off script. Folk metal. I've never heard of this, and I'm so intrigued. And so I'm going to look up like what it is, but tell us again the name of the Finnish band that you got your name from. What's the name of the band?
Korpiklani, Korpiklaani, I believe.
That music is very popular amongst LARPers and D&D enthusiasts. You have to have a certain affinity for both history and nerdiness to go for folk metal, and it delivers. And then you add in a little bit of like angsty. It's awesome, actually.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm kind of nerdy myself. Maybe I'll
Yeah, you're gonna love it. Yeah. It's very fun to listen to. It's really fun in a car to like rock to. So yeah. For medieval reenactment, what time period or place is your favorite?
My focus is mainly the early medieval period. So around the 9th and 10th centuries CE. Let's see, one of the reasons I'm so drawn to this time period is it's because of the material culture that's been revealed essentially through archaeology, and it is mind-blowing because it would turn your perception of the Dark Ages, so to speak, upside down on its head. So
yeah, anybody who doesn't know about the Dark Ages should go at least read the Wikipedia about it, because it's not as dark as you think it is.
Yeah.
I've fallen prey to this. I have literally said lots of people died.
Okay.
So then I read up on it, and I was like, oh, actually lots of things happened. Like many things happened during the Dark Ages, and some of them were like absolutely amazing. So like history didn't just stop for a while, like it actually kept going.
The way history and art history is taught is from a very Eurocentric lens, especially an Anglo-centric lens too. And so it often goes from the Levant to ancient Egypt to Greece to Rome. It usually skips the period between the fall of the Roman Empire and the high medieval period, so to speak.
Is that like 500 years?
More than that.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah. So to put into context, when historians usually speak about the fall of Rome, they place it around the year 476. That's more or less the beginning of the Dark Ages, so to speak. They sort of end the Dark Ages arbitrarily at the Norman conquest period in 1066.
Yeah,
there were a lot of things happening in Asia and Africa and South America and all of those other continents during those periods.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Speaking of which, I did create a story which focuses on medieval, sub-Saharan African art history, especially West African art history. And I talk a bit about the Yoruba and Ife bronze heads, which were these, bronze sculptures that, resemble naturalistic human heads. And also the Igbo bronzes, which were from an even earlier time period. So which were essentially contemporary to the Viking Age around the 9th and 10th centuries. So also sub-Saharan Africa's history of ironworking goes back pretty far back into antiquity there,
as well as like textile crafts.
Yeah,
textile, like cloth, basically, in sub-Saharan Africa was like lit during that period.
I also took a class on pre-Columbian Mesoamerican history too, and that also prompted me not only to do a deep dive on Mayan civilization, but also pre-Incan civilizations. And some of those cultures produced insane textiles like that were made of primarily llama and alpaca hair, and they produce these incredible zoomorphic and geometric designs, like especially the Paracas culture of southern Peru.
I had the pleasure of spending a bunch of time in South America, and I spent a bunch of time in museums in Bolivia and around the Lake Titicaca area. And there was huge civilizations there during that period, and their buildings are still standing. Like you can go inside of them, and they still have even the textiles, because somehow it's such a dry, arid place because it's up in the Andes that they were preserved. So I got to go look at them. It's amazing. And they don't really have any concept of the Dark Ages there. Like that's not what they call that. That's not how they refer to that period of time. It's not in the same way that we just think history just stopped because that's how we learned it. That's not how their education system goes. And it's really fascinating to learn about that from another perspective. I've also spent a lot of time looking at stuff from China during that period. Ooh, like I spent about 6 weeks in China checking stuff out. I'm not even a historian. Guys, just travel. It's amazing.
Yeah. I also took a course in ancient Chinese history too a few years back, and it's fascinating too.
Yeah. The artistry coming out of China, it is unparalleled.
I don't think we've had someone on the show so far that touches on as many cultures as you just did. And it's so cool that you have such an interest, especially in the material culture of all these kind of maybe lesser known or lesser looked at cultures that are still valid for historical, for history buffs to find pleasure in learning about.
They're more than valid. They're extra.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're more than valid. I wanted to piggyback on what you said about the West African ironwork. You mentioned that the Igbo have a tradition in ironwork. That is one thing that is very evident when you come to New Orleans. So I live in New Orleans, and when I take people around and show them all the ironwork in the French Quarter, that was done by specialists. These were slaves that had this particular profession, this particular knowledge They were craftsmen in their homes before they were taken from their homes and brought here. And when they were brought here, they could have been put in fields, but when it was realized that, hey, they know how to work with metal, so let's have them work with metal. So if you do visit New Orleans and you're looking around in the French Quarter, you will notice a ton of metalwork, a lot of balconies and trellises and just beautiful, intricate, lovely metalwork. And that was done by the people who were taken from West Africa and brought here. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't talk about. So I make sure when I show people around my city that I do talk about it. For a little bit of a lighter subject than heavy history and from the Dark Ages, what type of character do you gravitate toward when you do LARP?
I usually play characters that are relatively true to my own, temperament. So I don't completely divest myself from myself. Well, for those who have never met me, I'm a very reserved and introverted person, and I usually wait for the right moments to give input to any conversation. So, and a lot of that translates into the characters that I play as well. So I usually stick to human characters, and there's also a bit of overlap between my reenactment hobby and live action role play. I often wear the same garments that in LARP that I would for reenactment.
That's really awesome. I never thought about, like, I know some people consider the SCA a LARP, and the only reason I don't is because I feel like someone who's looking for a LARP would be disappointed if they showed up and found us doing experimental archaeology on, like, this is how you make cheese. And
it's fun, but it's fun in a different way.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want someone to be disappointed if they are wanting to build a character and like wear fairy wings or something. I wouldn't want them to be disappointed. But I've never thought about actually that I could be a historical person in a LARP. Like, I could do that.
Absolutely. There are straight up historical LARPs. The difference is in a LARP, it doesn't have to be historically accurate. So like you could have a zipper in your dress, but also like if you're portraying Catherine de Medici, you don't have to do exactly what she would have done. You can do what if Catherine de Medici like had a sexton or whatever, like whatever it is that your thing is that you want to LARP, you can do all of that. That was a horrible example, people, but probably been done anyway. So you can do like what if scenarios pretty easily. Okay. But still portray actual historical people too. SCA is kind of a LARP now that I think about it. It's funny that you said that.
Because we do recruitment. There have been talks about like, how do we recruit and how do we market? And some people are like, yeah, we're a LARP, so we should do this. And other people are like, we're not a LARP. We're not a LARP. We're better than that. And I'm like, I don't think I'm uncomfortable with the idea of us being a LARP because I think I'm better than that. I just feel like it would be false advertising and someone would show up and be very upset when I'm talking about like Caterina Sforza. But yeah, it comes up with the marketing. And I didn't realize there was such a strong, like, there are very strong feelings about what is and is not a LARP.
Yeah, so that hierarchy I mentioned is very much a hierarchy.
Well, I don't feel like I'm better than LARPers.
Yeah.
That is not, I do historical and I respect LARP. And I would actually, like, if I could do historical in it, I might get into that. Who knows?
LARPing is can be very fun. When I was in college, I did a Vampire the Masquerade LARP. That was sometimes they're super cheesy and sometimes they're awesome. It just depends on who's doing it with you and like how fun those people are and how far they're willing to take it without it being weird, you know?
Like you made it weird earlier.
Yeah, like I totally made it weird earlier, like that. Yeah.
Like that one time.
That one time 10 minutes ago. Yeah. How did you start in reenactment?
I began reenactment almost as soon as I began LARP in a way. They kind of, one kind of melded into the other. My fascination with the, early medieval period sort of developed, one could say, as far back as childhood. So throughout my adolescence, I just sort of developed an interest in Norse mythology and Scandinavian culture from the the Viking Age. So, and I sort of brought that into my experience when I first began LARPing. As the History Channel's Viking series sort of ruined it for not just me, but several other historical nerds. And I began to do a deep dive in other cultures for reenactment. I was I still am to this day a member of several medieval reenactment Facebook groups. One of them is the Viking Clothing Group, and another is reenactment market goods and services group. So it was through those groups that I had discovered other reenactors who essentially reenacted other cultures and time periods. And so another catalyst for my interest in reenactment was Pinterest. Just within the last 7 years or so, I just did a deep Pinterest dive into all these Eastern European reenactors. I've seen, portrayals of, Finnish Iron Age people and ancient Hungarians and Slavic peoples, Baltic Iron Age people. So, they were primarily from countries, such as Russia and Hungary and Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, and so on and so forth. And so when I saw some of the portrayals by reenactors of, ancient Hungarians, and I was really compelled to do a deep dive into the material culture and archaeology of the Hungarian conquest period. And I know it just really compelled me to dress that way. So I decided, in addition to Pinterest pictures, I introduced myself to academics in that area who really study, the material cultures and weaponry and accessories from those time periods. So, for instance, for the Finnish Iron Age, I was earlier on. I was introduced to Mervi Pasanen's work, and I'm not. For those of you who are unfamiliar with her work, she's sort of an internationally renowned weaver and textile worker whose primary focus is in the late Finnish Iron Age period, so which would correspond to the early to late medieval periods, 10th through 13th centuries. So yes, she was a huge inspiration for me personally. I was also inspired by a group in Hungary. One of their group leaders, whose name is Mestiler Janos, who also runs a textile, silk fabric company. It's called Kazar Bazaar. Really inspired me to acquire just the garments worn from that culture and time period, and the accessories. Yeah. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Magyars, or the ancient Hungarians themselves, they were a nomadic steppe group that sort of broke off from what's called the Khazar Khaganate. So essentially a federation of Turkic tribes which controlled portions of the Silk Road trade in the Pontic-Caspian steppe. And the Hungarians would break from them sometime in the early 9th century and eventually migrate westward into the Carpathian Basin and what's now today Hungary and Slovakia. So one event that really struck me was the invasion of Venice by the Magyars, which was a failed attempt, which no one talks about, essentially. They attempted to attach flotation devices, so perhaps leather bags, to their horse saddles to stay afloat in order to attack the city wall. So So we all know how that ended up. And I don't believe they ever made another attempt to invade Venice again. So
It was a very well located spot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll actually be there next week. I leave in
Mhm.
a week for Venice, and I had
Yeah.
never heard of that particular invasion, but probably because it failed. But I
Mhm.
am going to go and read about it because that's pretty interesting that they thought, like, even up to the point where they saw that it was across water and they're like, we're still going for it. We're just gonna
We're gonna tie bags to our horses to see if that'll just like let's talk about math. There's just simple math involved here. That's not gonna work out.
What events do you recommend for people wanting to get into either LARP or historical reenactment?
As I mentioned earlier, the historical reenactment scene, not only in this region, but throughout much of the US is pretty niche. So they're usually few and far between. And well, they're often private events too that aren't well advertised. There is a sizable Viking reenactment event every April, I believe. And it's in rural northern Missouri. It's the event's called Ravensbourg. It usually draws about 150 people or so annually. As far as LARPs, live action role plays go, I highly recommend Grand Bataille de Bicoline, which happens at a location called the Duce de Bicoline. It's in essentially the middle of nowhere, Quebec. Their premier event, the Grand Bataille de Bicoline, draws around 3,500.
Unlike Penzik, which is hot and sweaty.
Yes, yeah.
People who don't know what Penzik is, I don't actually do SCA, so why don't you talk about that, Gigi?
It is one of our flagship events. It draws about 10,000 people to the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, which is why it's called Penzik, for 2 weeks in August, September to, conduct experimental archaeology and have battles and all kinds of other stuff.
It's like where all the North American kingdoms get together though. Yeah.
Great parties, great battles, and great like photo ops because you're in nature and you're in your like amazing clothing, and there's lots of like arts and sciences classes. They have a thing called Penzik University there. So the one time I've gone to Penzik, I spent all my time in the university area, hundreds of classes over those 2 weeks, from everything from how to make cheese in the steppe to Italian like Renaissance 15th century dresses. So yeah. So this one actually, the one that you're talking about in Quebec, is that a certain time period that they're going for, or is it just everyone is welcome?
Yeah, everyone is welcome. It's a heavily Warhammer inspired LARP. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Warhammer, it's a tabletop game that's been around for a while. I'm not personally very familiar with Warhammer lore.
It looks way more gratifying to like LARP that out than to like paint a lot of miniatures and move them around on a board. Like, I think just going out and like whapping people with like pool noodles is the way to go. Like that's way more fun.
I can think of several people throughout my life who've inspired me, but specifically in the reenactment scene, I think many Russian reenactors especially have inspired me to go down the path that I went. One Russian reenactor in particular, Nikita Bolbikov, he does these really incredibly detailed depictions of ancient Hungarian clothing, and he's just over the years invested so much time and energy into his kit. And the research he put into the making of this kit has really inspired me to go forward. And another reenactor who's done ancient Hungarian, a Russian reenactor who's done ancient Hungarian personas is Stas Volobuev, I believe. He was one of the reenactors who earlier on made really high quality the steppe nomadic kits, from the early medieval period. So okay,
the Russians in every racist AF sometimes.
Yeah.
But they are amazing textile workers as a group of humans. The costumers from coming out of Russia right now.
Often pretty well read and researched. Yeah.
Yes. I've just had some personal run-ins with some of them that I'm like, wow, you're not a nice human. Cool.
I should also mention that I don't usually make my own garments, so I often commission, people who are far more competent than myself. In recent years, I have commissioned a couple of Russian tailors too to make my garments, especially the caftans. One of the small businesses is Sew or Die Reenact. It's run by Sofia Shashunova. She's a textile curator in addition to seamstress. So she's very, very focused, very well researched. Crafts very well researched garments, and she's worked with many of the original textiles themselves. So you have that added level of authenticity to the clothes she makes. And another business that I've commissioned is called Vetun Garments. Katerina Katanik and Dennis, they often make very garments that have really close, careful historical fidelity to them. So yeah,
I love that phrase, historical fidelity.
Yeah, as opposed to historical accuracy, which really is an impossible goal to achieve.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Do not make clothes or thread or cloth or anything the way we used to. You cannot be accurate ever.
If you could give new reenactors one piece of advice, what would it be?
Start simple and start basic. Don't make the same mistake that I did by acquiring expensive accessories and weaponry and garments all at once. Take your time with building a great kit, because it's years long, almost lifelong process too, and one could argue it's never ending too. So.
All right, if you have a closing message of inclusion or equity that you'd like to send out, please do.
The medieval reenactment scene globally, is a pretty large base, but it's overwhelmingly and very blaringly white too.
Yes.
And a lot of that is by and large due to exposure, but also, yes, segregation too has been, it's been the default, and not only this country, but several European countries as well. So exposing that to multicultural groups has been a challenge for many reenactors to if one were to recruit more people of color, try going to nerdy conventions like comic conventions, steampunk fantasy conventions, or anime conventions.
Magic the Gathering competitions.
Yes, Magic the Gathering competitions. They tend to attract nerds of color too, and in droves usually. So I would highly recommend anyone who's doing outreach in that area to attend those events and recruit from there.
Share your information, people. Share that info with people of color relentlessly.
Yeah.
Ask them if they would like some information. Don't push it on them. Maybe they don't, but ask them.
Yeah, if they do, they'll let you know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Paul. It was nice getting to know you. And I want to say personally, it was actually kind of nice to be able to talk about autism for a second here.
It's weird too, because we've had 3 other autistic people on this show.
And I've never talked about it?
I don't think so, but maybe.
Wow. I mean,
we'll have to go watch those. And that was a year ago.
Right?
I feel like we should get it, like all the autistic costumers together and talk about it. Like have a show that is about costuming in color while autistic.
I mean, it's intersectional for sure.
Yeah.
And I think there are some distinct challenges and also some pretty cool amazingness that come at this intersection of autism or maybe neurodivergency and being a person of color at the same time. So I would be up for that. I actually would.
Excellent.
So it was lovely to get to know you a bit better today, Pecco the Stoic. And now I love that I know what your name is about. Thank you also to our viewers for joining us today. We will leave a list of Paul's information down below for you to go follow him on all of his platforms.
Please do give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. It helps us with outreach and making the algorithm grab onto this video and shove it out a little bit farther to other people. Subscribe if you haven't, and if you have a customer of color, even if that's you, and you think we should interview that person, use the form that we insert in the description below to let us know about that person so that we can get them on our radar and maybe give them an interview. Make sure to leave a little love for Paul in the comments below, and we will see you guys next time with another great interview. Bye, guys.
I think I'm ready. I think I'm feeling good.
Are you ready? Do you feel good?
All right.
Do you feel stoic?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's do it.